You meet someone online. They seem perfect, too perfect. You ignore the warning signs because loneliness makes you desperate. 3 months later, you're in a hospital bed fighting for your life, and the doctors tell you something that makes your blood run cold. Someone deliberately infected you. This isn't fiction. This happened to a real person. And what makes it worse? The person who did it was someone trained to save lives. Billy Carson was 53 years old when he met her. A quiet man from rural Tennessee, Billy had spent most of his adult life working construction jobs that kept his hands busy, but left his heart empty. His marriage had ended a decade earlier, his 2 grown sons lived out of state, and his social circle had shrunk to weekend fishing trips with a buddy named Earl and Sunday dinners at the local diner. Billy wasn't looking for love when he created that dating profile in the winter of 2019. He was looking for companionship, someone to text good morning, someone to share a meal with, someone to remind him that life still had warm moments left in it. The profile he created was honest, almost painfully so. He used a recent photo that showed the gray in his beard and the lines around his eyes. He wrote that he enjoyed classic country music, didn't mind a quiet evening at home, and hoped to find someone who valued honesty above all else. For weeks, nothing happened. A few messages here and there that fizzled out after polite exchanges. Then, in early March, a woman named Tina May sent him a message that changed everything. Her profile picture showed a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She said she was 48, worked in healthcare, and had recently moved to Tennessee from Louisiana after her mother passed away. She wrote that she appreciated Billy's honesty and thought it was refreshing to see someone who wasn't trying to be something they weren't. They started messaging daily. Tina was attentive in ways Billy hadn't experienced in years. She remembered small details he mentioned, asked thoughtful questions about his life, and shared stories about her own past that made her seem vulnerable and real. She told him about growing up in a large family, about the patients she'd cared for over the years, about how hard it had been to watch her mother decline. Billy found himself thinking about her constantly. Within 3 weeks, they met in person at a coffee shop in Cookeville. Tina looked different than her photos, older and more worn down, but Billy dismissed it. Everyone looks different in real life, he told himself. What mattered was that she was there, smiling at him across the table, asking him about his day with genuine interest. They started seeing each other regularly, dinner dates, drives through the countryside, nights spent at his small ranch house watching old movies. Tina was affectionate but never rushed things. She told Billy she wanted to take it slow, that she'd been hurt before and needed to build trust. Billy respected that. He felt the same way. But there were moments that should have raised alarms, small inconsistencies that Billy ignored because he wanted so badly for this to work. Tina sometimes canceled plans at the last minute, claiming work emergencies or family issues. She never invited Billy to her place, always insisting they meet at his house or in public. When Billy asked to meet her friends or co-workers, she'd change the subject or make vague promises about it happening soon. She had an old flip phone that she said she preferred because smartphones gave her headaches, and she rarely answered when Billy called, always texting back hours later with apologies. Earl, Billy's fishing buddy, met Tina once and pulled Billy aside afterward. "Something about her doesn't sit right," Earl had said. "I can't put my finger on it, but just be careful." Billy had brushed it off. Earl was protective, maybe overly so. Besides, Tina made Billy feel alive again. That had to count for something. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By late spring, Billy and Tina had been together for 3 months. They'd become intimate, though Tina remained somewhat guarded even in those moments. She had scars on her arms that she said were from a car accident years ago, and she always kept the lights dim, which Billy attributed to self-consciousness. He never pushed. He was just grateful to have someone in his life who seemed to care about him. Then, in early June, Billy started feeling sick. It began with fatigue that he couldn't shake. He'd come home from work sites exhausted, barely able to keep his eyes open through dinner. Then came the night sweats, drenching his sheets so thoroughly he had to change them in the middle of the night. He developed a persistent cough and a low-grade fever that wouldn't break. Tina, with her healthcare background, suggested it might be a summer flu and urged him to rest and stay hydrated. Billy trusted her assessment and tried to push through it, but it got worse. The fatigue turned into something deeper, a bone-tired weakness that made even simple tasks feel impossible. He lost his appetite completely and started dropping weight at an alarming rate. His skin took on a grayish pallor, and the cough became so severe it left him gasping for air. Earl showed up at Billy's house one afternoon and found him collapsed on the couch, barely responsive. Against Billy's weak protests, Earl drove him straight to the emergency room. The doctors ran tests immediately: blood work, chest x-rays, cultures. Billy spent 3 days in the hospital while they tried to figure out what was wrong with him. The initial diagnosis was pneumonia, but the antibiotics they prescribed weren't helping. Billy's condition continued to deteriorate. His fever spiked to dangerous levels. His lungs filled with fluid. The medical team grew increasingly concerned as test results came back showing infections that didn't make sense for someone of Billy's age and health history. Opportunistic infections. That was the term the infectious disease specialist used, the kind of infections that typically only affected people with severely compromised immune systems. On the 4th day, a young doctor named Sarah Chen sat down beside Billy's hospital bed with results that would shatter his world. She spoke gently but directly, the way you'd tell someone news you wish you didn't have to deliver. "Billy, your test results show that you're HIV positive. The virus has progressed significantly, which is why your immune system is so compromised and why you've developed these infections. We're going to start you on antiretroviral therapy immediately, but we need to understand when and how you might have been exposed." Billy stared at her, unable to process the words. HIV positive. It didn't make sense. He'd been with exactly one person in the past decade. Tina. When he said her name out loud, Dr. Chen's expression shifted. She asked careful questions about Tina, how they'd met, how long they'd been together, whether she'd ever mentioned her own health status. Billy's mind raced through every conversation, every moment, searching for clues he'd missed. Tina had never mentioned being sick, never mentioned HIV, had never suggested they use protection beyond the first few times when she'd said she was managing things with birth control. Dr. Chen excused herself and returned an hour later with a hospital social worker and a representative from the county health department. They asked Billy for everything he knew about Tina May: her full name, where she lived, where she worked, any identifying information. Billy realized with growing horror how little he actually knew. He had a phone number that went straight to voicemail when he tried it from the hospital. He had an address she'd once mentioned, but when authorities checked it, they found it was a vacant property. He didn't know where she worked, didn't know her last name, didn't know anything concrete. The woman he'd spent 3 months with, the woman he'd let into his home and his life, was essentially a ghost. The health department launched an investigation immediately. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, they explained. This was potentially a criminal case. Knowingly transmitting HIV without disclosure is a felony in Tennessee. If Tina had infected Billy deliberately, she could face serious charges. But first, they had to find her. They pulled her dating profile, but it had been deleted. They searched for Tina May in healthcare worker databases and licensing records across Tennessee and neighboring states. Nothing matched. The profile picture she'd used was traced through reverse image searches and found to be stolen from a nursing blog from 2015, belonging to a woman in Oregon who'd never heard of Billy or Tennessee. Billy spent 2 weeks in the hospital fighting the infections that had nearly killed him. The antiretroviral therapy began to work, slowly building up his immune system's ability to function. But the physical recovery was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. Billy replayed every moment with Tina, searching for the truth in a relationship that now felt like it had been built entirely on lies. He called Earl from the hospital and told him everything. Earl sat beside Billy's bed for hours, not saying much, just being there. When Billy finally broke down crying, asking how he could have been so stupid, so blind, Earl put a hand on his shoulder and said the only thing that mattered: this wasn't your fault. Someone targeted you. Someone saw your loneliness and used it as a weapon. The investigation moved slowly. Detectives assigned to the case found that Tina May had been careful. She'd paid for everything in cash. She'd never given Billy anything with her real name on it. The flip phone she'd used was a burner that had been disconnected. She'd left virtually no digital footprint. For weeks, it seemed like she'd simply vanished. Then, in late July, a break came from an unexpected source. A nurse at a hospital in northern Mississippi contacted Tennessee authorities after seeing a bulletin about the case. She'd treated a woman matching Tina's description who'd been admitted with advanced AIDS-related complications. The woman had used a different name, but the physical description and the few details she'd let slip matched. She'd mentioned Tennessee. She'd mentioned dating someone recently. When detectives arrived at the Mississippi hospital, they found the woman still there, her condition critical. Her real name was Patricia Lowell. She was 56 years old, not 48. And she had indeed been a nurse, licensed in Louisiana until 2016, when she'd been fired from a hospital in Baton Rouge under a cloud of accusations that had never resulted in formal charges, but had effectively ended her career. Colleagues had reported suspicious incidents involving patients under her care, medications going missing, patients developing unexpected infections. There were whispers, never proven, that Patricia had deliberately contaminated IV lines or syringes. The hospital had quietly let her go rather than pursue an investigation that might have exposed their own liability for not catching the problem sooner. After losing her nursing license and her career, Patricia had moved frequently, supporting herself with cash jobs and maintaining relationships with men she met online. The pattern emerged as investigators dug deeper. She'd had at least 4 previous relationships in the past 3 years, all with middle-aged men from rural areas, all men she'd met through dating apps, all men who later reported similar experiences of her disappearing without explanation. 2 of those men had subsequently tested positive for HIV. One had died from AIDS-related complications before ever connecting his illness to Patricia. The detectives obtained a warrant and sat down to interview Patricia in her hospital room. She was skeletal, ravaged by the same virus she'd allegedly been spreading. Oxygen tubes ran to her nose. Her eyes were sunken, her skin covered in lesions. She looked like someone already halfway gone from this world. At first, she denied everything, said she didn't know anyone named Billy Carson, claimed the detectives had the wrong person, but when they showed her printed screenshots from the dating profile, photos of her and Billy that he'd kept on his phone, something in her broke. She started talking. What Patricia said in that hospital room was chilling in its honesty. She told detectives that she'd been diagnosed with HIV in 2008, shortly after a brief relationship with a man who'd hidden his own status from her. She'd been devastated, angry, betrayed. She'd managed it for years with medication and regular treatment, but after losing her job and her nursing license, she'd stopped taking her antiretrovirals. Whether out of depression, denial, or something darker, she'd let the virus progress unchecked. And somewhere in that progression, her anger had curdled into something else. If I couldn't have love without this virus destroying it, she told the detectives, then why should anyone else get to have it? It wasn't about the specific men. It was about the unfairness of it all. She'd created the dating profiles deliberately, specifically targeting men who seemed lonely, who seemed like they'd be grateful for attention, who seemed like they wouldn't ask too many questions. She'd been careful to avoid leaving evidence. She'd lied about her name, her age, her history. She'd never disclosed her status. She'd insisted on unprotected intimacy, despite knowing exactly what she was doing. The detectives asked her directly, "Did you know you were infecting these men?" Patricia looked at them with eyes that held no remorse, only a tired kind of resignation. "Yes," she said. "I knew." Billy was informed of Patricia's confession from his home, where he'd been recovering for several weeks. Dr. Chen had released him from the hospital with a strict medication regimen and regular follow-up appointments. His physical health was slowly improving, but the emotional toll was immense. Learning that Patricia had deliberately infected him, that every moment of their relationship had been built on a calculated deception, was almost more than Billy could process. The district attorney in Tennessee filed charges against Patricia Lowell, criminal transmission of HIV, assault, and fraud. But Patricia never stood trial. 2 weeks after her confession, while still hospitalized in Mississippi, her condition deteriorated rapidly. Her immune system had been destroyed. Her body couldn't fight the multiple infections ravaging her organs. She died on a Tuesday morning in mid-August, alone in a hospital room, her estranged family having long since stopped visiting. Some might say that was justice. Others might say it was simply the inevitable end of a tragedy that had consumed multiple lives. Billy learned of Patricia's death through the detective assigned to his case. He didn't know how to feel about it. Relief? Anger that she'd never face real consequences? Sadness at how twisted a person's life had to become to do what she'd done? Maybe all of it at once. He attended a victim support group that Dr. Chen had recommended, a space where people living with HIV could share their experiences and support each other. Billy was shocked to discover how many people in the group had been infected through criminal transmission, through partners who'd knowingly hidden their status or, like Patricia, deliberately spread the virus. 6 months after his hospitalization, Billy's health had stabilized significantly. His viral load had become undetectable with consistent medication, meaning he couldn't transmit the virus to others, and his own health prognosis was good. He'd returned to work, though he'd moved to a different construction company where fewer people knew his story. He'd reconnected with his sons, who'd flown home when they learned what their father had been through. Those conversations had been painful but healing, forcing Billy to be vulnerable with his children in ways he'd never managed before. Earl remained a constant presence, checking in regularly, making sure Billy never felt alone in his recovery. Billy started speaking openly about what happened to him. He gave interviews to local news outlets, wanting other people, especially other lonely people seeking connection online, to understand the risks. He wasn't trying to shame anyone or spread fear about HIV itself, which he'd learned was manageable with proper treatment. He was trying to warn people about predators who used intimacy as a weapon, who saw vulnerability as an opportunity for harm. The story of Billy Carson and Patricia Lowell isn't just about infection or betrayal. It's about how vulnerability can be both our greatest strength and our greatest risk. It's about how loneliness creates opportunities for exploitation. It's about how pain, when left untreated and unaddressed, can transform a victim into a perpetrator. And it's about how survival isn't just about staying alive, but about choosing every single day to keep being human, to keep trying for connection, to keep believing that not everyone is dangerous, even after you've been devastated by someone who was. Billy still lives in Tennessee, still works construction, still goes fishing with Earl on weekends. He takes his medication every day without fail. He speaks publicly about his experience whenever asked, wanting his pain to serve some purpose beyond just surviving it. His life isn't perfect, but it's his, and it's real, and he's fought too hard for it to take any of it for granted. When people ask Billy if he's angry at Patricia, his answer surprises them. He's angry at what she did, absolutely. He's angry at the devastation she caused, the lives she destroyed, the trust she shattered. But he's also sad for her, for how completely her own suffering consumed her until she became something unrecognizable as human. In the end, Billy's story is a warning and a testament, a warning about the dangers that lurk in our most vulnerable moments, when loneliness and desire for connection can override our instincts for self-protection, and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to our capacity to survive betrayal and trauma and come out the other side, still willing to trust, still willing to try for happiness, still willing to believe that connection is worth the risk. If you're watching this and you've experienced something similar, if someone has betrayed your trust in ways that feel impossible to move past, Billy's message to you is this: it wasn't your fault. Predators are skilled at what they do. They know how to identify vulnerability and exploit it. You didn't do anything wrong by wanting to be loved, by hoping for connection, by trusting someone. What happened to you says everything about the person who hurt you and nothing about your worth or your judgment. So what would you have done if you were in Billy's shoes? If you'd met someone who seemed perfect, who paid attention to you in ways you'd been craving, would you have seen the warning signs? Would you have asked harder questions? Or would loneliness have made you just as vulnerable? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're important ones.